Hello and welcome to the Rubin Museum of Art. My name is Bill Appleton, and it's my great pleasure to be part of our launch onto Periscope as we give you a tour of some of the wonderful, amazing objects on view at the museum. Right now we're actually going to focus our tour on Nepal and the incredible works in our collection. We have over 600, and really if you're going to start in one place, I have to say at our entrance here, anyone who walks across 17th Street can't help but notice this incredible mask behind me. And to talk a little bit more about it, I have my wonderful colleague, Tashi Chodron, who is going to join me on the tour and explain a little bit more detail about the art. Welcome, Tashi.
Thank you, Bill. So this piece is a very, very spectacular piece that tells you about the wrathful form of Hindu god Shiva, and his name is Bhairava.
And you know, you mentioned his name, and I can't help but look at him. You say wrathful. What about this makes you say wrathful, Tashi?
So when I say wrathful, what you see is, you know, you look at these fangs coming out and bulging eyes. So these very fierceful looking, they're actually, that's the way to identify that these are the wrathful looking figures.
And you mentioned eyes. I can't help but notice, is this an extra eye that he has in his forehead?
Again, the three eyes that you see here is, in one way, being able to see beyond what we ordinary people can see. So the three eyes actually represent being able to see past, present, and future. So that's the special thing about having three eyes.
You mentioned past, present, and future, and this extraordinary object isn't just the face, it also has this incredible hair and headdress. What's going on up there?
So again, what you see here is a peaceful face. So this is actually the Lord Shiva. And then you see some snakes here. So that's how you can identify that this is the Bhairava, which is the wrathful form of Lord Shiva.
And you say Bhairava, what does that word mean?
So Bhairava is this fierce looking, which is actually represents the protector, you know, protecting you and protecting the teachings of the Lord Shiva.
So wrathful actually has a positive feeling for people in this world.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, and you also mentioned, you know, lots of different things about the culture and the snake, and but I'm also noticing these incredible things here. What are those?
So what you see here is actually skeletons. Yeah. So these five skeletons actually represents the five elements, but beyond that, the skeleton actually in Hinduism and Buddhism, which is a very esoteric kind of a tantric representation of simple reminder of how impermanent everything is. Regardless of who we are, it's kind of saying that we all turn into this. Sort of like a simple reminder of how impermanent everything is.
What an amazing mask, but you know, I can't help but notice as I look at it, you mentioned three eyes, but I don't really see where you could look through if you were wearing this, except for there's a hole in the mouth. What's that for?
So one of the interesting thing about these masks is, what I understand is that, you know, in a ritual, although this is used in a procession, obviously it's very heavy, so one person cannot really wear this, but in traditional form of the mask, they actually hold this chin part with their teeth and they look through this. But this hole, as you're asking, what does it represent, is actually a tube that comes through this, and they actually dispense beer, sort of like a festival that happens in Nepal once a year, and the devotees, when they drink nectar or the beer, they believe that it purifies their whole year of obstacles, and then kind of brings them good luck and good health.
So when is this festival? Can I get beer if I go? When do I go?
Sure, I'll let you know. It's mostly in March, but then again, sometimes the lunar calendars, they have slightly shift, so it kind of changes as well.
Well, if you ever was a term for the nectar of the gods, I guess this is really offering to us. But you mentioned impermanence, and we're on a tour focusing on the Nepalese art at the museum. We wanted to go to a few other favorite objects that are on view in our spiral gallery. It is an extraordinary moment that we have not only in our entire collection, I mentioned 600 objects, but we have so many on view right now. And and we will look at a couple examples that we put on view, really for anyone who comes to the museum. And in particular, we have this wonderful installation that is ongoing, but right now focused to honor Nepal.
Right.
And so I'm going to bring us over, Tashi, to a couple of our favorite objects. We have really a whole opportunity. I encourage everyone who's watching us, following us, to visit our website and to look at our Honor Nepal. We have much more information about these objects, and if you want to learn more, please don't hesitate to contact us, follow us on Twitter, and keep going back and coming back to Rubin. So actually, we just looked at a mask, Tashi, but now we're looking at something very different. What are we seeing here?
So what we're seeing here is a beautiful example of how the Thangka painting is, which is a mineral pigment on cloth. And this beautiful painting actually represents the Ratri Machandranath temple, which is in one of the three biggest cities in Nepal. This particular temple is in Appleton, and the temple of Machandranath.
Well, let's look more closely again. I mean, the first thing I notice is that it's incredibly red. Is that something very particular to this region?
So that's a brilliant way of observing it. It's a prominent kind of a, perfect signature look of a Nevari or Nepalese style, which is this red on red.
And you can't help as we come closer to it to notice that there are lots of different figures in it. And let's start in the middle. Who are we looking at?
So what we are looking at, this particular figure that you see here is a perfect example of Hinduism and Buddhism going hand in hand in Nepal. So this is the Machandranath god, which is a Hindu god, whereas in Buddhism, he's known as the Red Avalokiteshvara, which is the Buddha of compassion. So Hinduism and Buddhism both go hand in hand.
So depending on which sect, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but you could see this as either character. I mean, can't hesitate to say it, so it's sort of like looking at Jupiter or Zeus, depending on if you're a Roman or a Greek. But what tells you specifically that it's one or the other of these gods?
So again, this temple being the Machandranath temple, which is a Hindu god, and then when you look closely, you see this the figure here, red, figure holding this lotus in the left hand, and then the right hand in giving or generosity gesture. So this says that this is the Padma Pani, which is actually Padma means lotus, in which case relates to the Buddha of compassion, the Avalokiteshvara, red in color as well.
Well, certainly very meaningful at this time, but speaking about figures, I can't help but also notice that we have an extraordinary group of people below here. Who are we looking at down here?
So that's, again, yet another perfect observation. So, for hundreds of years, nothing really has changed in the sense that when a big donor gives a big donation, what goes up on a building? Donated by so-and-so. So that's exact, what's happening here. These are actually the donor figure, and you actually see the inscription. Their names are labeled underneath each figure as well. So it's a perfect example of donor figure, donating for this building of this construction.
And even if we look a little bit more closely, they all seem to be in a very similar pose. What are they doing as donors?
So as you see the hands in a folding gesture, so it's a reverence, devotion. So that's the form that you often see in the Himalayas.
And it looks, obviously, each row seems to have their own version of our god and deity here, whether you call it by Hindu name or Buddhist name. But where are we? What's up on top? I see now a temple as well.
So again, if you go up on the top, the first two rows here, and actually the top three rows, as I mentioned earlier, Hinduism and Buddhism going hand in hand. So even though this is a Hindu temple, but what's going on here is actually the first three rows of the whole life story of Buddha. Buddha's birth all the way to the enlightenment, reaching enlightenment.
And you mentioned Hinduism and Buddhism, so are there specific elements with the temple itself that would speak to both audiences?
So the temple, just in a simple word, it's a very important place for devotees in Nepal. Hinduism and Buddhism go every day to pray, and Machandranath, considering or associating him with the rain figure. So people in Nepal actually pray to Chodron, especially when they rely on rain water. When there's a drought, then they would request for rain, things like that for the farm.
So it's not necessarily that this was created for the temple. Could it have been created by other? I mean, we see all these donors. Do you have any idea where it comes from?
It's very interesting because it's kind of hard to nail it down whether this piece is coming from a temple or a private family shrine. So it could be either. So it's hard to say that.
And I also can't help but notice that there's different kinds of characters here around our featured god. Do you know anything about those?
So one of the prominent thing about how to identify that this is Nelari figure, besides the red and red, is also these beautiful aesthetics of these rows of different figures. But you see this figure here, kind of half snake and half human. So these are the Naga, which is the under earth or under water kind of spirits. And so it's actually known that the Lord Manjushri actually came to Nepal and drained the lake out and then built this temple. With that in mind, in the water spirit is the Naga. So you see these Naga figures, which plays a very key role in this painting.
So many of them, even these Naga forms that you mentioned, seem to have some kind of jewelry around their neck. What is that, Tashi?
So jewelry actually represents sort of this prosperity. Again, day to day, people often say, Buddha figures and all these figures, why do they have so much jewelry? Because there's so much talking about detaching from material world. But these are actually artists who actually create these for sort of a sign of prosperity.
Well, you mentioned prosperity, you mentioned impermanence when we were looking at the mask and here, and we have another favorite character that's on view on this wall that really is probably the favorite of every school kid that comes to the Rubin, and also the favorite of so many of our public. Anyone coming from this region has a very special connection to this fellow. Who are we looking at, Tashi?
Well, we are looking at our favorite sculpture, Hindu god Ganesha, and Ganesh is actually the obstacle remover.
You say obstacle remover and you say Ganesha, but I mean, is he human? What is he?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like a mythical figure, as you see here. It's half elephant-headed, half animal, half human, and human body. So it's an interesting...
It is an interesting, and as I look closer, I see he seems to have many arms. Was that helping him or us?
So again, in the Hinduism and Buddhism, you do see god and goddesses with multiple arms. So 4 arms, 6 arms, sometimes 1,000 arms. That's basically being able to reach out to many to help.
So whatever it takes.
Yes.
Well, speaking of what it takes, we also have something here I can't help but see from where I am is, you talked about donors before, but I see some kind of donation going on here. What are we looking at, Tashi?
Again, once again, modern day, where when we go to a shopping mall or being under a certain spot under the bridge, what they say, wish granting kind of an idea, throwing a coin sort of an idea. So that's exactly what's going on here. And what they do is here, offering these pennies and any amount, doesn't matter, regardless, but you give it with full, faith and devotion. The belief is that your wish will be granted.
Well, I see that it's very respectfully placed here on this pedestal, but now that I look closer in your direction, I see that there's also some money that seems to have found its way onto the sculpture.
Yes, so it's interesting, isn't it? Like I said, it doesn't matter whether it's $100 bill or 50 or $1 or a penny, but you give it full devotion, the wish will be granted. That's the idea.
So we've been talking a lot about impermanence, and at the same time, we're here at a museum where our great goal is to preserve and present art. But I'm sort of interested to know, is it okay for us to be saying that people can touch this?
Again, one of the very special thing about Rubin Museum is that even though the sculpture is 11th century sculpture, you can actually touch to a certain extent when you're making these offerings. it's a great gesture, and so yes.
Wonderful. Well, I don't have any money with me, and I'm not sure I want to be on film doing it, but if you come to the Rubin Museum, I can't help but encourage you to do it during a couple different times. Every Wednesday night we have a fantastic tour of our Nepal installation throughout the museum. You can honor Nepal and go with one of our wonderful tour guides. If you're lucky, you might get Tashi. You can also have a great time here every Sunday afternoon between 1 and 4. We have our fantastic family programs where we have some art making in our education center. We take you all through and show you this art again. And then we're also so fortunate on Friday nights. I think perhaps the thing that the Rubin Museum has launched itself in its first decade doing the best is making Friday nights really the place to be. You cannot get more interested or involved. And so it's an opportunity to sort of bring to a close our tour. I just want to encourage you all to honor Nepal. You can do it in so many ways. The fantastic thing is that you can do it just really from your home by staying observant, by following some of the suggestions of ideas of how we might live that Tashi said during our tour. One can also go to our website. We highly encourage you to do that. We've sort of found ourselves in a position of helping people connect to places that you can honor Nepal. And if you go to rubinmuseum.org, you will find many opportunities of your choosing, all of which we've properly vetted and work closely with the people of Nepal as well as other organizations to make sure this is the best way to get money. And finally, I just have to say that really we all can do our part by remembering how important and how fantastic this material is and how much the ideas that Tashi was talking about earlier of just of giving, of connecting, of breaking through the things that are obstacles for us, and in the way how we can help place ourselves and our community in a better place. So to honor Nepal, I will say I will first start by honoring all of you for watching us out in Periscope World, and also honoring my wonderful colleague Tashi Chodron. It's such a pleasure to work with you. Thank you so much for joining us.